Welcome back, all you nerds! Today we're going to be looking at the ability to create waves of enemies. Essentially, once we destroy them, they will come back, and in greater numbers too. They will respawn, and I have it set up so they change what they look like, as well as getting stronger, more of them, faster, all that fun stuff. So it'll work kind of like a tower defense game where the enemies keep getting stronger until you eventually lose. And it is quite easy to run this. It is just barely over a page worth of code, and none of it too complicated. We have three main things we'll be looking at here, and let's go ahead and hide all this. Step one is keeping the values. So we're going to keep the values mostly in globals, as well as on our enemy sprite. And we need to keep track of the round that we're on, as well as how many enemies are alive. So the main core of this is to get a count of the enemies that are alive, and once that hits 0 or less, which should never happen, once that hits 0, we start the next wave. And each time we hit the next wave, we're also going to want to bump up the current round. So jump in. My layout was gone. Jump into my layout. We have our sprite object right here, and you can see it also has its own variables. It's going to have a move speed and a health, and that's just because each individual instance of this sprite needs its own health. That way when one takes 1 damage, the other ones do not. And as well as their own move speed, that's how I get that little gap between them. They're not all just cluttered together. They run at a random speed, and we'll bump into that more later. And that is all the variables we care about. So back in our code, now that we have variables, we are on to phase 2, and that is creating the enemies. Every tick, we are going to get that count, and that's going to be pushed into our enemies alive. And we simply do that by grabbing enemy 1, which is the name of my object here. You could also do a family of different enemies, or you could do multiple counts here. Enemy 1, enemy 2, enemy 3 count, and add those all together for your enemies alive. And we set that every tick, and then we also set the text. That way we can visually see it, and that's just right up here, how many enemies remain, and it drops down as they die. Also, we need to move them to the end. That way they have a goal or a way to defeat us. And we simply, on created, we set them to move 2,000 pixels to the right, which gets them past the edge of the screen there. And here is our check for if we are out of enemies. So if we defeat a level and we just call in more enemies, we could also add in different functions for rewards, or if there's going to be different events that happen every so many. If you want to add a boss, you can do a check for every 10 levels have been defeated, and then you can call the boss one instead. So this will be where you state that you've defeated all your enemies, and then you call in your new enemies. And that's all done in a function. And here I just add 1 to round. So I start my current round on 0, since I'm always adding 1 to round. That way, at the start of the game, it goes from 0 to 1 as it summons its first enemies. And then I simply summon 10 plus the number of round I'm on. So this will make it go up by 1 each round, starting at 11. Additionally, we have to create the enemy object, and I throw a little bit of random on the location that can be spawned. That way they aren't all on top of each other. And then we set the animation, and this is done with calling the different animations that I have them named as. They're all round with numbers 0 through 4. And I just concatenate those two together with using the remainder math equation. So current round %5 will give me the leftover of dividing by 5. So if I'm on 1 and I divide by 5, it's 0 with a remainder of 1, so that would be round 1. And so forth. And essentially that any number I go to, this will just loop me through my 5 different enemy types that I have. And then each enemy gets its own speed, and that's why they separate out. And again, this is based off of the current round, so it's 20 to 35, multiplied by 5 times the current round. Additionally, I scale them up and set their health based on the current round as well. So that's everything with summoning the enemies, and that brings us to our final step, which is phase 3, a way to defeat the enemies. And obviously you can do this any way you want. I just wanted a quick way to show that we are destroying the enemies and they can go down to 0. So I just have a on left button is down, which just infinitely summons my little explosion sprite. If that touches an enemy, it'll destroy the sprite and also damage the enemy. So as their health goes up, it takes multiple explosions to kill them. And then I also give them a flash behavior to make them flash ever so briefly, 0.01 seconds. I'm always checking if any of the enemies have 0 or less health, because that means they're dead, and then I destroy them. And if I had a point system, this is where I'd add in any value that is gained for destroying each enemy, or if there was a coin system or a loot system, it would all be done right here. And then finally, I have floating text that comes up and shows the damage numbers. As you can see right there, and that just simply uncreated moves them up 5 pixels, and then they are built to slowly fade out over the course of a second. And we can see that right here. Uncreated, they start fading out and then they're destroyed, so I don't have to worry about cleanup. And then they move to, and if I wanted it to slowly drift up, I could change the max speed or the acceleration speed. But I'm not too worried about the finer details on this. And essentially that is all you need to create an endless wave game. You can always build it up way more in depth than this one, but this should get you started. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns or anything's not working. Otherwise, you can always hop on itch.io and grab the code and work with it yourself. The images do not belong to me, so if you use them in anything, just make sure you give credit, and you'll be able to find that in the description below. Otherwise, peace!